Welcome. My name is Leslie, and I am the director of the Vincent J. Fontana Center for Child Protection. Welcome to the 5th webinar in the APSAC Fontana Center webinar series. This session is being recorded, so if you don't want to be included in the recording, please turn off your videos. If you have any questions, you can type them into the chat and we'll be happy to answer. Before we do any introductions, I want to let you guys know about some exciting opportunities coming up. The APSAC Foundling online course is still available, offering 8 modules and 25 multidisciplinary experts. There's a code for that today for 10% off, webinar 10, and we'll put links to sign up for that in the chat. We also have this webinar series. The last webinar is coming up on November 9th for the series, and that's from 2 to 3 p.m. with Stacy LeBlanc. Talking about mandated reporting. We'll also put a link to that in the chat. The reading club will take place October 12th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. And then, of course, we have an exciting conference coming up, as you can see my background. It's in Brooklyn from November 14th to November 16th. And there'll actually be a Foundling conference the day before, pre-conference on December 13th. And that is going to be free to APSAC members and Foundling staff as well. And then we have the colloquium in New Orleans from the 11th to the 15th. So we have that as well. And then we also have a partnership program. Everybody, we want to make sure that everybody who's not presenting has their mute on as well. We have the APSAC Partner Program, Recognizing, Responding to, and Healing Trauma in Faith-Based Communities on October 21st with Bruce Perry and Darrell Armstrong, who you'll see today. Next slide. Well, I also want to mention something else that I will put in the chat. We have a social media competition that is happening right now. And the competition is to submit memes, videos, GIFs about positive parenting and ending corporal punishment in schools. There are cash prizes, and it ends on November 1st, so you have a whole month to submit. I'm going to put more information about that into the chat as well. There are about 24 prizes this year, and if you are interested in making memes or videos about this, you can win some money. So before we begin, I would like to introduce Dr. Darrell. Well, the workshop today is titled, What Do Red States, Blue States Tell Us About Religion, Parenting, Corporal Punishment in America, with Dr. Darrell Armstrong. And I would like to introduce Dr. Darrell Armstrong, who is a reverend at Shiloh Baptist Church in Trenton, New Jersey, which is a thriving, multicultural, and multi-generational community of faith that has been around since 1980. Reverend Armstrong is a civic leader, a grassroots community organizer, and a child welfare, family strengthening advocate who is committed to eradicating the individuals and generational effects of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So I would like to welcome Dr. Darrell Armstrong now. We're going to unshare our screen and let him quickly share his screen.
Okay, thank you all. And let me put my screen up. Start broadcast. Okay, I hope you all can see that and hear me. We're all good, Leslie?
Yes, I can see it and I can hear you. Thank you so much, Darrell.
Awesome. So let me thank Dr. Mel Schneiderman and Leslie and Ilana and Minerva and all the good folk at the Vincent J. Fontana Center there in New York City at the New York Foundling. Always an honor to be with them, and certainly an honor to be with you all on today's broadcast. I do want to start our conversation off by, and I want to be mindful that I'm going slow enough for our interpreter, so thank you. Reiterating the workshop title, what do the red states and the blue states tell us about Religion, Parenting, and Corporal Punishment in the United States of America. This topic is one that I hope integrates a number of different constructs around what we know about the latest Pew data on religiosity and spirituality in the United States of America. And once we know that, how do we use that data to inform strategies about ameliorating and hopefully eradicating child maltreatment, corporal punishment, and all the other ills that are affecting our children? And so it's really kind of saying, what do we know about the places where we live? Dr. Cornel West said race matters, and I like to say place matters. I like to say religion matters. I like to say really all of these constructs are to be taken together and held in tension as we think about how we go about promoting better child health and eradicating child maltreatment. Let me also thank all of my dear friends at the National Initiative to End Corporal Punishment. In addition to Dr. Mel Schneiderman, our fearless leader, we have a group of amazing men and women who are committed to doing the work of, in this case, on this committee, ending corporal punishment, but in the larger context, eradicating child maltreatment. So I want to thank Stacy LeBlanc, who is the president of the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, APSAC. I want to thank Viola Vaughn, who is the president emeritus of APSAC, Dr. Melissa Merrick, who's the president and CEO at Prevent Child Abuse America, Dr. George Holden at Southern Methodist University in Texas, Dr. David Coren at the University of Utah, and Victor Veith at Zero Abuse Project, and a host of other folk who have really been committed to addressing head-on the issue of corporal punishment, but again, in the context of dealing with child maltreatment. So today, I want to ask or deal with 3 R's, right? Race, region, and religion. Believing that these 3 R's, again, deal with the aspect of what do we know and how do we apply it in dealing with the topic of child maltreatment. So what do these maps? I'm going to show you a series of maps today. And so I'm an elementary cartographer and a lay demographer. And so I do not claim to be an expert in these fields. Some of you know cartography better than I, and others of you I'm sure know demography better than I. But my public policy training at Stanford University has given me an appetite for saying, wherever I've lived, what do I know about that region? So I grew up in South Central Los Angeles. What do I know about the racial demographics of the City of Angels? I know that South LA and East LA, predominantly BIPOC communities, Black, Brown, Beige, persons of color communities. But if I go to South Central LA today, where I grew up on 97th and Normandy, it's a much larger Hispanic community than it once was when I grew up in 1974, 75, 76, up until I went off to college in 1887. The San Fernando Valley was predominantly white when I started busing into the San Fernando Valley, and it was the last major urban school district to desegregate its public schools. And so now if I go to places in Van Nuys and Reseda, it is a much larger BIPOC community than it was 20, 30 years ago. Pacoima was the large Latinx community in the San Fernando Valley. And that was at the northeastern edge of the valley. Now you find large communities of BIPOC families all over the valley. And so what do I know about my hometown? What do you know about your hometown? When I moved to the Bay Area, I went to school at Stanford. I lived in Palo Alto, but when I graduated, I moved into East Palo Alto, and it's a small 2.5 square mile strip of land right on the bay at the foot of the Dumbarton Bridge, connecting the east and the west sides of the bay. East Palo Alto was once, in 1988, the murder capital of the United States of America. 2 square mile little city, and arguably is one of the most wealthiest strips of land in the United States of America. When I moved east to go to seminary at Princeton Theological Seminary, I landed in Princeton, but I ended up living after Princeton in Trenton. And Trenton has the dubious reality of being always in the top 10 of America's most economically challenged cities, along with Camden and with Newark. Funny how New Jersey has 3 of the top 20 poorest cities in the United States of America. And so race matters, region matters. How did my region become what it is? And so I want to take a macro look at some of these issues and then begin to hone down into the meso, into the micro aspects of what do we know about where we live and how do we apply it to the work that we're doing. Surely these things didn't just happen. Surely East Palo Alto and Trenton and South Central Los Angeles did not become what they are by accident. I believe that there was intentional and deliberate public policy that led to what we see. And all of us has to ask the question, how did my community get this way? Robert Wood Johnson tells us in their zip code study, right, where we understand that there's a 20-year differential between a child who grows up in an affluent zip code and versus a child who grows up in a non-affluent zip code. 20-year difference. 20-year difference in life expectancy. That ought not be in America, and that ought not be anywhere in the world. And so how do we change the notion of NIMBY, not in my backyard? How do we change that into this is our backyard? And so not that I don't want you being in my backyard, but how do we make our backyard better for children in the United States of America? So race matters, region matters, and religion matters more than we realize. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. And so what do the maps that you will see now tell us about religion in America? That's what the IA stands for. What do the maps tell us about your region in America? That's what the IA stands for. And lastly, what do these maps tell us about religion in America? Back in 2004, this famous American, Barack Obama, the 44th president of the United States, uttered words and really uttered a speech that really portended and was the harbinger of his amazing political career. And in that speech, many of us will remember, he says, we're not a collection of red states and we're not a collection of blue states. We are the United States of America. He used rhetoric and he used antithesis to really draw in our commonality, not what we're not, but what we are. And that really became a hallmark of President Obama's speech making, his speech writing, his public persona, that he was a uniter as opposed to a divider. And we've seen what a divider leader can do. And I think history will bear out that this president, Barack Hussein Obama, was a uniter. And so I think long before Barack Obama began to use this notion of red states and blue states, these color scheming or schematics of red for Republican and blue for Democrat actually was flipped. In the 1960s, it was actually red for Democrats and blue for Republicans. So funny how things change and how much they end up staying the same. this notion, if you would, of red states and blue states, and then we add in the purple states, right? This, you know, the states that were carried by Republicans and Democrats, and the purple states. You know, again, it just kind of gives us a sense of what do we know about the country? Did this map look this way 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago? Will it still look this way 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now? And that's the question that we all have to ask ourselves. Is this a bad thing that America looks like this? Or is it an okay thing that America looks like this? Well, you know, we all have our opinion about that. And depending on what political persuasion you might be, you might say it's a good or bad thing. And so before I go further, I want to introduce you to a video about the racial dot map. This is an effort that was put forward by the University of Virginia. And I'm going to ask Leslie at this time to show the video. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to come back on the other side. And so I thought that video really summed up some of what I was trying to say at the beginning of my presentation about even my own living experiences, right? I've lived in 3 spots in the United States of America. Some of you have lived in many more areas than I. I've spent first 18 years of my life in Los Angeles, South Central LA, but as a consequence, all over the basin in Southern Cal, and then another 8 years of my life until I was 26 or so in, again, the Palo Alto, East Palo Alto area, and then the last 26 years of my life since 1995 in the mid-central New Jersey, Delaware Valley area. All of the issues are the same wherever I've lived around race and region. The one thing that I've tried to superimpose on these issues is the issue of religion. And what does religion then, how does religion infuse itself, or the conversation get infused in this dialogue around race and region? And so the Brookings Institute has also come up with a very similar device around dot mapping. And so again, this is not new science. It is not parochial to the University of Virginia, to the Brookings Institute, or to any organization. CNN is has started to use this information. And I just really wanted to introduce at this point of the conversation the idea of how racial dot mapping and dot mapping is absolutely a crucial tool in our conversation around race and region in today's society. Here's what we know about poverty in the United States of America. And as you can see this map, the percentage of children in low-income families by region. Now, this is 5 years old. I used to cite data from the Children's Defense Fund right about the state of children. Every year she produced a state of the children. It shows the level of incidence of poverty and extreme child poverty. But here, what we see is that the greater percent of child poverty or children living in lower income families by region is in the southern eastern part of our country, the former Confederate states. And I think what we can generally extrapolate from my presentation today is there is a unique reality, both racial, religious, and regional, about these southeastern states. They are certainly great in football, American football, college football, I should say. But there's something very unique about the mix of race, region, and religion in these southeastern states. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But what we now can see from this map, and again, this is from a most reputable source, the National Center for Children in Poverty, how they've mapped poverty in the United States of America. And Certainly we know in Mary Wright Edelman, the first Black woman to ever earn a Juris Doctor degree from Mississippi, and her famous work with the Children's Defense Fund and Freedom Schools and you name it. She and most maps will tell you that African-American, African descended children in the United States and Latinx children in the United States are at the highest realms of children living in poverty. And then certainly if you take it by age, what we know is that Black children are the highest levels of children per capita percentage to their population in the United States have the highest level. Some 36% of Black children, nearly certainly 1 in 3, nearly 1 in 4, or higher, I should say, living in poverty. So these maps are, again, this data, but again, looking at it regionally is what I think is so compelling. And again, when we live in these regions, what do we do about these data? So this is another map from the Brookings Institute that I showed a little bit earlier. And for those who can't see, this deals with race equity, right? Places with equity risk factors similar to New Orleans are located primarily in the Deep South. This is based on United States counties in 2018, 3 years ago. And so the red, as you would imagine, is the worst, so the most challenging. And so we begin to see some unique areas on this map with regards to places like Fresno. And here's what I can tell you about the Bay Area. The median income or the median price of housing in the Bay Area, particularly in Silicon Valley, is nearly $1.5 million. And so any Blacks and Latinx community and poor whites, they've simply been priced out of the market. They cannot live in the Bay. And so there's been a steady migration eastward from the Bay, over the Oakland Hills, through Pleasanton, into the California Central Valley, into places like Tracy, Fresno, even down as far south as Bakersfield and Solano and other places in the Central Valley. And people are documenting 2-hour commutes from these mid-California cities into their workplaces because they need the jobs in the Bay, but they cannot afford to live in the Bay. Now, there's always exceptions and pockets, we know, because one of my theories is that for every well-off, affluent community, there needs to be a pocket of poorer, less affluent folk who wash their cars, wash their sheets, nanny their children, and take care of the items that they don't want, the duties that they don't want or choose not to do. And so I believe that for every affluent area in the United States of America, close by, there are individuals who are less affluent, who are dependent upon the affluent families for their own livelihood and income. So even though these red dots that you see by county, or these red splotches that you see on this map by county, represent some of the higher incidences of inequity and race or inequity in the country. Again, there's a story behind the map. There's a story behind the color. And that's what I really want to press all of us on. Ask the question, what's the story of how my region got to be the way it is? Racial disparity in the United States, the worst states for Black Americans. Now, what is interesting about this map is, although we see other maps where we would conclude that the southeastern states are the worst, given perhaps some of their racial realities, the Confederacy and slave-holding states. What we certainly can see from this map is that some of our Midwestern states, even our northeasternmost state of Maine, now gets codified in this category. And so again, I think you're not looking at the acuity based on numbers. You're looking at the acuity based on percentage of the population who lives in a particular region in that particular city or that particular county. But this map, again, is sobering because one begins to see, well, maybe it isn't all the South's problem. And we've got problems where we live also. The most racist places in America, again, kind of amplifying the map that we just saw, not just previously to this. I think what's really interesting to me about this map is the Rust Belt. And so looking at counties in the Appalachian regions, and not just the southern region, but looking at Ohio, looking at some of the eastern Pennsylvania or western Pennsylvania, and some of the other areas that we may not tend to think, but certainly when we look at the history of race and racism in the United States, we can certainly link and pay attention to what we're seeing. Now, I'm going to skip now to the issue of corporal punishment. So Stacy LeBlanc and others on our national initiative to end corporal punishment is leading what we call our no hit zone movement. And here's what we know about the number of preschool students who they didn't report, but is reported to have experienced corporal punishment in the last 5 to 6 years. And we see the greatest incident and the greatest number of these, and again, these former Confederate states, the southeastern part of our country. And are we surprised or are we not surprised? Well, one should also look at the light blue states and looking at Idaho, looking at Nebraska and Montana, Arizona, which, folk tend to throw in the progressive West. I think what we have seen in the latest political genre in the last 8 years is that it is not always the case, that region based on demographics may ebb and flow and fluctuate for many different reasons. And some of this is just, where are opportunities being produced? Where are people moving? When I look at maps like this, I think of the book Warmth of Other Suns and Isabella Wilkerson's codifying of the greatest demographic shift of Americans in the United States history. That was Black folk moving from the South and going to the North and to the West. And that demographic shift changed so much of what we knew life to be in the United States of America, starting in the late 20s on up into the 60s and 70s. My grandparents, my maternal grandfather and maternal grandmother were among this first wave of Black Americans to migrate from Arkansas and Louisiana and Texas. Those states went west, or those demographic pushes went west. The states in Mississippi and Alabama, they went straight up the Mississippi River into places like St. Louis and Detroit, even into Minneapolis and certainly Chicago. And then the eastern states from Florida, Georgia, North, South Carolina, Virginia, they went straight north as well and migrated into places like Philadelphia, New York City, Trenton, New Jersey, where I am now, Newark, New Jersey, up into Boston. And so this demographic shift is, again, at the heart of so much of what we see happening to Black folk in America today. And we have to understand why these things happen. Corporal punishment by school district. And again, the incidence and prevalence of what we see across the country is the highest in the American South. Now, this is where I want to superimpose the issue of religion onto our conversation about race and region. because this is not coincidental what you see on this map. It is not coincidental that fundamentalism is the most religious states, I should say, are southeastern states. If you Google what are the most religious states in America, the Pew Charitable Trust will pull up its mapping and show very similar mappings like this. And so the question of how does religious fundamentalism play into race and region, I think emanates or gets captured in this conversation about corporal punishment. The 1611 King James Bible, and my friend Victor Veith, who's one of our fellow members on the National Initiative to end the Executive Committee on the National Initiative to End Corporal Punishment. He and I have talked a lot about religious fundamentalism and Black evangelicalism and white evangelicalism. And but here's something that we can surely say: the 1611 King James Bible can literally be met, which was propagated around the world by England, can literally map out where we see issues of religious fundamentalism using the Bible to justify racism and so many other isms, right? And so the notion that the King James Bible gave rise to what might be our modern racist state, not only in the United States of America, but wherever the King James Bible was read, it was used to justify slaves obey your master, women be silent in the church, spare the rod, spoil the child, which is not a biblical statement. It's a synthesis of two biblical fragments that was put together to make a point, or at least drive home a point. And this is where I always, for those who know me, give my statement around eisegesis and exegesis. And eisegesis, when you read into a scripture what you want, and exegesis, EX, is when you take out of a scripture, you excavate out of a scripture what is probably deeper meaning than what we normally see. And so again, the notion in these southern United States, southern states of our country, where individual rights and states' rights were paramount, right? We fought the Civil War because of federalism. The United States government doesn't have the right to tell me what to do. And they don't tell me what to do with my property. And they don't tell me how to treat my slaves. And they don't tell me how to treat my children. And they don't tell me, the White House doesn't tell me what I can do or can't do with my wife. This issue of states' rights versus federalism, what is good for the country, is what we fought the Civil War over. And yes, the issue was whether slavery should continue to exist in these United States, but our white Confederate brothers and sisters, you framed the conversation around religious liberty. Congress shall make no law establishing a religion, nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. Congress shall make no law establishing a religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So even today, we see this issue of states' rights and individual rights cloaking major issues of equity in our country: justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, access gets framed. So it's not perceived as a racist issue, it's perceived as a states' right issue. It's perceived as an individual rights issue. It's perceived as religious liberty. The gun issue notwithstanding, do I have a right to carry the gun? The Second Amendment, that's another conversation. But the First Amendment, religious liberty and individual liberty, is what often gets framed. And I don't think what we see on this map is coincidental. I'm going to get ready to close my presentation. Again, I was going to go into a number of issues around the issue of disproportionality in the child welfare system. My presentation will be available for those who wish to receive it and download it. I'm going to move towards the end of my presentation. And I mentioned earlier about the executive committee of the National Initiative in Corporal Punishment. Many of these organizations this committee is made up of all of these organizations and others as well. And certainly the likes of Dr. David Finkelhor and Dr. Joan Durant and so many others who are quintessential experts, much greater than I, in this conversation. And so as I think about my personal story and mapping and maps and what I lived and experienced, and I want you to think about what you've lived and experienced. I had other maps that shows the higher incidence of ACEs being certainly traced to our southeastern states, or somewhat might say the co-occurrence of poverty and education dealing with issues in our southeastern. But again, I don't want to hone in on just an American region. I want to say that in every region, every county, and maybe that's the best microcosm of scale to look at. The city is one thing, but the county really speaks, because counties tell us where the pockets of poverty. We know that in Mercer County, New Jersey, where I reside, Trenton has the highest rate of poverty. But when I look at the county and began to look at affluent areas like Princeton and Hopewell, and look at the pockets of poverty in their city, then I have to ask the question, what is the county going to do about it? The city alone didn't get that way of Trenton, and it's going to take more than the city of Trenton to change the county demographies and demographics and policies that concentrate poverty. Let me give you one example before I close. When I moved to New Jersey in 1995, there was something called the COA, or the Mount Laurel decision, which was about affordable housing. Every housing development in the state of New Jersey was required to have a certain percentage of affordable housing to go with it. Well, the council, you can imagine that generated a lot of controversy. Some folks said, there's no way you can make me build housing for affordable housing, which is code for what? Poor, less affluent folk moving into my community. So if I'm building mech mansions in Princeton, why do I have to build a percent of affordable housing somewhere in Princeton? And so what happened in New Jersey was that the reciprocal contribution agreement, the RCA, was created. This is amazing. Listen to this. And so the RCA allowed wealthy communities like Princeton and Hopewell, I have a little gnat going on, excuse me, to sell their obligation to build affordable housing to poor urban communities like Trenton. So this is what happened. McMansions were built in Princeton. The requirement was to build a certain percentage of affordable housing units in Princeton, but because of the RCA, those affordable housing units were transferred and bought, sold to Trenton, and Princeton got credit for building affordable housing units that actually did not exist in Princeton. They existed in Trenton. So let that sink in for a minute. New Jersey is probably one of the most micro segmented, hyper segmented states in America. 586 different municipalities, each with their own fire and civil service requirements and everything, city governments. 586 in one of the smallest states in America. And because of NIMBY, not in my backyard, I don't want to build affordable housing where I live, sell it off to Newark, Camden, and Trenton. And so we've since changed that thanks to some good public policy. But the point was region matters. And if I got just honed in on what the issues in Trenton were and all the urban violence and everything else, I would miss the larger meso and macro issues of how did Trenton become the way it is. And that had Princeton has everything to do with why Trenton is the way it is. And I can hopscotch around your state, your county, and make the same claim. Whatever is the less affluent city in your county, I can guarantee the more affluent community in your county had some public policy influence on how that community became the way it is. So my mother, many of you have heard me talk about my mom, teenage mom, and research would bear out that teenage mothers perhaps have a higher incidence of child maltreatment, particularly teen moms who grow up in poverty areas. That's a controversial statement, but I think there's some truth about what that portends. Because of the ACEs of their parents, those teen moms probably find themselves in a situation because of their parents' ACEs. And so now you have to look at societal ACEs, the societal generational trauma that is meted out in this form of public trauma. My mom was 14 when she got pregnant and 15 when she gave birth to me. And at this point in this picture, I was probably 2.5 years old. I don't really know. This is the only baby picture I have of my mom and myself. And so it's a way for me to honor my mom. This picture is a later picture of my mom after 4 births, 4 Black boys, all of whom were taken away from her because of child abuse, because of opioid use, crack and heroin, and because of her own bout with domestic violence with her companion at the time. Not my dad, not my brother's dad, but my last 2 brothers' dad. And so the baby mama drama, right, is something that's real for folk across the racial spectrum, okay, for Black, white, red, or brown. And so my mom dealt with all of these issues. And I always say, if my mom had come to your agency, she would have presented with all this stuff: teen pregnancy, substance abuse, infant partner violence, child abuse and maltreatment, so forth and so on. My mom's boyfriend put my 2.5-year-old brother in a tub of scalding hot water. Now, this is after other incidents of physical abuse towards me and him, but for some reason, my 2-year-old brother was the targeted child. And we know that some children are targeted in families for many reasons. It happens to be the testosterone issue that my baby brother's father had with my mom's last companion. And so he decided to take out his anger towards the man on my baby brother, the man's baby. He was targeted and he was scalded over 2/3 of his body with 2nd and 3rd degree burns, placed and submerged in a tub of scalding hot water. And so the impact of race, region, and I would even dare say religion on families like mine are real. We were placed into foster care. My brother was taken into custody by his paternal great aunt, who ended up raising him. And then 2 years, or nearly 15 years later, my mom had my 4th brother, left him in the hospital. He was born addicted to crack. And the woman who raised my brother, Quincy, also raised my last brother. And we never lived with my mom again. Sadly, in 1998, my mom was found dead in her home in South Central LA from a crack heroin overdose. So she died. And the man who 27 years earlier had put my brother in a tub of scalding hot water was with her when she overdosed. And so my mom's life, 45 years old when she died, was tragic. She suffered a great deal, beautiful woman. And I honor her, but I want to change this reality for other moms like my mom and help make life better for dads. You know, who should play a role in their child's life, but they have to be constructive in how that play constructive roles in their children's lives. And so we want to make life better for all of our children, right? We want to be somebody's angels. And I've had many angels. I've talked about my grandmother, who was only in my life physically for probably, 4 or 5 years. The first 3 or 4 years of my life, I bounced between my mom and my grandmother, but she left something so amazingly valuable in my life. And so too did this beautiful woman, Roberta Hawkins, who's 88 years old now, but she was one of my first social workers, and left amazing impact on my life. And so caregivers have power, parents have power, and we who are caring for our children and other folks' children. I want to leave you with this notion. These are my children, Amaris and Daniel, and so they've grown and are growing up. But how do we break this cycle of childhood poverty, child maltreatment in whatever region we live? And I want to leave you with this story. I call it Bikes in the Driveway. There was a 15-year-old girl who was shot in the shadows of our church 2 weeks ago, Friday the 24th of September. When I got word that she was shot, I went over to the scene only to encounter the yellow tape, multiple bodies. And I first was told this young girl was 12. It turns out she was 15. She was shot in the head, killed instantly. Another 19-year-old girl was shot, and she is to this day brain dead in one of our local Trenton hospitals. 2 other teenagers were shot in a spree of bullets from unknown assailants. And so I went home after that incident, and when I arrived home, so imagine I'm leaving the scene of multiple shooting victims, and only to realize that these multiple shooting victims were teenagers, some of whom were the same age as my own children, right? The 15-year-old girl is the same age as the 15-year-old son that I have. Daniel is 15, this girl was 15. I arrived home 7 minutes from the church in urban Trenton. I live in a suburban neighborhood. When I arrived home, it was about 9:30 at night. And I saw a group of my neighbor's children, predominantly white, running around the neighborhood. And they were kind of doing a version of hide and seek. So when I pulled up, I was a little concerned. I thought maybe something happened, similar to the group of teenagers I just saw in Trenton. And these teens were saying, "Oh no, Reverend Armstrong, we're having fun. We're out having fun. Go find the man," or some kind of game they were playing. And I said, "Well, you all be careful." And the parents did not need to be there because I live in a fairly safe neighborhood. So I pulled my car in the driveway, and I saw 4 bikes in the driveway at 9:30 at night. And that image struck me. Bikes in the driveway. What allows children to grow up in neighborhoods where they are so comfortable and so safe that they can leave their bikes in the driveway at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night and have no fear of the bikes being stolen, have no fear of someone beating them up and taking their bikes, and certainly have no fear of someone doing a drive-by shooting when they went to get back on their bikes to ride home at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And I leave you with this image, bikes in the driveway, because surely that was not the scene that I had just left 7 minutes before in Trenton, where the 15-year-old girl was shot in the head and lay dead. Why can't those children in Trenton leave their bikes in the driveway, just like my Caucasian neighbor's children can leave their bikes in the driveway? Why do these children in Trenton, 7 minutes away, have to worry about drive-by shootings with semi-automatic weapons. And these children in my neighborhood, and I am in no way berating my neighbors nor their children. What I want for my children and their children is what I want for the children in Trenton, the children in East Palo Alto, the children in North Philadelphia, which is experiencing its highest rate of murder, gun violence, 410 homicides this year. Is it coincidental about the pandemic and the pre-existing conditions? I want children all over America to be able to leave their bikes in the driveway at 9:30 at night and not worry about all of the risk factors. But today in America, that's not the case. And the maps that we looked at earlier bear this out. So let's work to make the difference and break the cycle of helping all of America's children be able to leave their bikes in the driveway. So that is the end of my presentation. What do red states and blue states have to do with race, religion, and region in America? I hope we can make all of America safe for all children to leave their bikes in the driveway. God bless you. God keep you. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, my friends at the New York Foundling.
Thank you so much, Dr. Armstrong. That was an excellent presentation. We have about 4 minutes and a lot of questions. I think we can get to probably 1 or 2 of them. So
okay, I'm sorry for not leaving time.
Oh no, it's okay. It definitely is okay. Let's see how many we can do. Well, one is somebody wants to know a little more about what the Committee to End Corporal Punishment is up to right now, what they're doing. So if you can drop a couple of the projects they're working on.
Yeah, real quick, and if you can put our website in the chat, Leslie, for NIECP, that would be great. We are working on federal legislation to address issues of ending corporal punishment in schools. There are 19 states in the United States of America that still have it legalized, corporal punishment in schools. We're not even talking about bans and statewide initiatives. We're just talking about trying to deal with schools. And so that's a major issue that the national initiative is working on. Another initiative is to promote no-hit zones around the country. Our church, predominantly Black Baptist Church, became one of, some say one of the first Black houses of worship in the country to declare itself officially a no-hit zone. And that means not only no adult to child violence, but also means no child to child violence, no adult to adult violence, and no child to adult violence. So those are some of the biggest initiatives. And you may have heard earlier about our social media campaign, trying to promote issues to raise awareness about corporal punishment.
Thank you. I'm going to put a link again to the social media campaign that's in there. So I think we can get another question in. One of the attendees asked, knowing that the Bible was utilized to create control over family and slaves, the Old Testament was more about the law than the love of the New Testament. Why does Old Testament oversees the New Testament with the law of the community? That's a big question.
Wow. Say the last part again. Why does the Old Testament?
Why does the Old Testament oversee the New Testament with law over the community?
If I can, I think, interpret the question, I think really it's the Old Testament scriptures that tend to get used when it comes to justifying corporal punishment and other ills in our society. But, Paul has been, some say unfairly criticized because of his writings in the New Testament for his treatment of women, and some might even say children. But what I always like to say when you're doing biblical exegesis, that you have to take all of the scriptures together. So whatever your holy book is, I was looking earlier about the Quran and certain scriptures within the Quran that some say justify corporal punishment or beating even, the mistreatment of women. And yet what I never want to do is isolate one scripture and then use that to be extrapolated against, this is what the Bible says. The Bible says many loving things about how we care for children, right? Don't provoke your children, fathers, is something that Paul says also in the New Testament. So scriptural interpretation and exegesis is difficult at best. And the best thing we can do is not take one or two scriptures out of context, but really understand what the totality of scriptures say about a given topic, and then deliberate about that topic with all of those scriptures at hand.
Thank you so much. Well, it is just about 3 o'clock right now. So I just want to thank you for your excellent presentation. Somebody just asked about the slides. You'll get a recording, you'll get slides, you'll get all of that once we get everything organized. So thank you guys so much. And thank you, Dr. Armstrong, for your wonderful presentation today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Everybody have a great day.